Hello there. Welcome to Intercept CSA, the podcast, where we break harmful silence with truth, healing, and protection, one conversation at a time. I'm Inifon Samson, your host and guide for this conversation. Thank you for joining me. If you have parents or people caring for children around you, do make an extra effort to have them listening. Place your devices beside them, invite them to lean in. Every bit of awareness counts for children. Now, a gentle reminder before we go any further. This conversation might be triggering. Remember to breathe, pause, and do what feels safe to you before you return. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Intercept CSA, the podcast. After a short pause, we're excited to be back and diving into episode 13. We're still in season 1 and still continuing to share episodes that raise awareness and educate the public about child sexual abuse. Many of the topics we've covered will return in future seasons, but for now, season 1 is all about laying the foundation, introducing the basics, and sparking conversations that matter, and that's exactly what we're doing. This is the episode to bring our disclosure series to a close. So far, we've explored what disclosures are, how children share the experiences, and the nature of disclosure itself. We've also discussed how to support a child during this process and reflected on the burden of disclosure. Today, we'll focus on a new perspective, how to respond when a partner tells you about abuse. That is, how to respond as a person being told. We'll also look at what to expect from a child after disclosure and share practical recommendations for supporting them in the days and months following. Let's begin what to do as a partner who has just been told about a child's disclosure. First, remember that it's not easy for your partner to even say those words out loud. Even if they sound calm or composed, it's definitely not easy. So as you respond, hold that in mind. Also in that moment, you both need each other. This is not the time to retreat into silence or start pointing fingers, whether it's blaming your partner or drowning yourself in guilt in such a way that causes you to pull away from your bond. When you actually pull away, what you do is that you leave the whole responsibility of protection on one person's shoulder. And the reality is this: no one can carry that burden alone and be okay. So again, you feel things like shock, anger, grief, maybe even shame. And those feelings are valid. But what matters is how you show them. If your first reaction is to explode in rage or collapse into despair, your partner will feel even more alone. So as much as possible, focus on your unity. There'll be time to process anger, regrets, or have difficult conversations later. But right after a disclosure, the priority should be standing together. Your partner needs to feel that you're not drifting apart. They need to feel like they can lean on you. It is also possible that once your partner tells you, if it is someone close, you may feel like the best response is confrontation or violence. But please remember that violence may land you in circumstances that will be unfavorable for your family. You could end up in jail. You could lay hands on someone and they fall down and that's just the end of their life. You could also hurt your legal case. So violence is not a good option. It's not an option. Another reason you may want to go physical is because you feel as though your child is damaged. And sometimes, especially when it's a very little child and the disclosure was immediate or just found out, like in the case of babies, it can also be that you're looking at your child in a very poor physical state. There are so many stories, so many horrific stories of children right after an abuse and just the poor state that could leave very little children. And that is very heart-wrenching for any parent. But it's always best to allow perpetrators to be held accountable by the standard bodies and organizations that have been designed for that purpose. Also, in most cases, children make full recovery from abuse, especially when they have support and care. And I know that that's may be hard to believe when you see how much the trauma has already changed the child. But human beings are resilient. Your child is resilient. And if you continue to commit to working that healing process with them, they will recover with time. Now, we spoke in the last episode about what I would call the mother's burden, or the burden of protection when it comes to motherhood and disclosure, which is that heavy load of guilt and blame that so often falls on women when a child is abused. And now we want to share how husbands, siblings, friends, extended family can support a woman specifically as she's navigating that. The first and most important good I think you can do for a woman in that position is to be present. Walking through the reality that a child has been harmed on your watch, given how much a woman already feels responsible for protection, is bound to be heavy. So as much as possible, be present fully and completely to provide support. It is also important to help her articulate what she's feeling. When you can find an opportunity for it, let her know that you realize that she may be feeling responsible for the abuse. Let her know that you hear what she's not even saying to anybody. Let her know that even though you do not fully understand how she's feeling, you are aware that this is a possibility. Draw her attention to the ways that you've seen her serve that child in the past. Because the brain easily obscures all good when guilt is present. When we are feeling guilty, everything that we've done that is good, that is perfect, that is great in life feels almost as though it has taken a backseat. So help her find that good, help map out that good for her. So you want to help her name the feeling if she hasn't already pinned it, and you want to gently leave droplets of truth in that discussion. Droplets of truth that remind her of herself as the mother she has always been and still has the capacity to be. Of course, it may not bring immediate relief, but an existing positive counter mental voice is always a gift. As a spouse especially, be deliberate about sharing the responsibility. Be deliberate about sharing the responsibility. From the first steps you take, from thinking about which doctor to go to, where to take the child to for psychological evaluation, from all of those processes, be deliberate about sharing that responsibility to the way that you speak about the case at home. Make it clear that this is not her failure or her fight alone, and show it in both words and action that you are in this together. Remember too that one conversation will not erase guilt. You may need to reassure her over and over again and be clear about letting her know that she's a good mother and this is not her fault, because women take disclosures very heavily. This is not her fault. She needs to know that. If you also have the emotional bandwidth yourself, give her room to keep telling you how she feels. Sometimes people recover by telling over and over again. So if you have the emotional bandwidth, give her room to keep telling you how she feels and repeating the disclosure moment, that moment of disclosure, that moment where the child walks into her room or into the sitting room or wherever she is and tells her this massive story. Let her keep repeating that disclosure moment as many times as she needs to be able to come to terms with it. And of course, because you're human and because you are also walking through the process yourself, if it is too heavy for you, encourage her or work with her to get help. It could be with a therapist, it could be a religious counselor or a close friend, but definitely encourage her to let out rather than push down emotions. You'll also need to guard her against outside voices. We know that it is a cultural thing for extended family members, church members, and even neighbors to be quick to point fingers at a mother, to be quick to say, what was the mother doing? How did somebody miss something like this? How could you not have known that your staff was doing something with your child? It's very easy for people to say these things. So as people begin to criticize or whisper, please speak up. Speak up and hold off people. Speak up, redirect the conversation to where it belongs, redirect the conversation to where responsibility truly belongs, which is on the abuser. Let people know that this is not her fault. Make it clear that the only person responsible for this is the abuser. Also encourage her to rest and take care of herself too. Many mothers in situations like this try to suffer with the child in order to prove their love. It almost feels as though, why am I eating when this child is not eating? Why am I sleeping when this child can't sleep? Why do I have a life that continues to flow in its normal rhythm when this child has nothing? So there is that trying to compensate for guilt or whatever they feel like they were not able to give the child by punishing themselves in the process. But self-care doesn't mean that she is neglecting her child. Self-care is necessary because it is what will give her the strength to stay present for the long journey ahead. So please remind her that it's okay to take a nap. It's okay to visit a friend. It's okay to step out for a moment. There are also times when the best support is silence. Actually, silently letting her cry, silently letting her sit without words, letting her express her anger. It is just important because sometimes words actually shut people up and don't let them feel like they have the space to share what they feel or how they truly feel above the encouraging words that we have for them. So sometimes our words actually shut people up. Sometimes we're so busy telling them you'll be fine, this child will be fine, that they're not able to say, I don't feel like this child will be fine, I don't feel like I'll be fine, and all of those things that needs to come out of them and exist in the world so that they can walk away from that moment free of that fear, free of that emotion, free of that worry. So sometimes the best thing is just silence. Sometimes the best thing is just sitting with this woman and letting her cry if she wants to cry. Like I said, letting her be angry if she wants to be angry and letting her express herself beyond what is true. Express her fears, express her worries. That's very important for the healing process to take place, which needs to happen for her as well. Also, take your time to highlight her role in this child's healing. As a spouse, tell her all about how she has spoken up for this child from the moment of disclosure and how she continues to be a safe space. This kind of deliberate reframing would really help her move from seeing herself as a mother who has failed to a mother who is available and making room for this child's healing, because it's very easy for her not to see herself in all the ways that she's showing up for this child presently, all the ways that she's breaking out of possibly even how her own parents had responded to her own abuse, or even the fact that she could have been a survivor who never got to tell her story. So many times she misses out of all of that because she's feeling this sense of guilt and this sense of pressure and all of these things. So it's important that someone is pouring back into her and letting her see how much of herself she's giving to this moment. In addition to the individual counseling and support I suggested earlier, go through therapy or any other mental support process together. Any other process like counseling with a religious leader, like I talked about earlier, or sitting with an older couple that has been in your lives for a long time and can listen to you and can give advice. Go through it together. Suggest a place. Bring this as a suggestion and then go alongside with her. For me, I feel like this is the loudest way to say, I don't blame you. This is the loudest way to say, we're in this together. Lastly, you know this woman best. You also know her environment and you see all the struggles that she's navigating since disclosure. So use that knowledge of what you know about her, use that knowledge of what you know about the unique challenges that have risen since the disclosure. Use that knowledge to show her love and support in the way that you know that she most needs it. This list is by no means exhaustive. Whether it's on how to respond to a partner who has just told you about a child's disclosure, or how to ease the mother burden for women on the other end of the disclosure, this list is by no means exhaustive. And I say so because the aftermath of child sexual abuse disclosures really differ depending on a host of factors that are very, very specific. So what we've tried to do in this particular episode is to anchor our suggestions on what we suspect you will deal with culturally. What we suspect you will deal with culturally, conventionally, what you will deal with. But when it comes down to family culture and pre-disclosure family complications, like whatever was existing before this has now come on top of that, all of those things could make this process even more complicated. So this would still help, but there are a lot of other things that may come into the process. So as people walking through a process like this, also lean into the wisdom of those whose thoughts you value around you. Lean into their thoughts, lean into their wisdom. Like I talked about older couples that you've always had in your life. Lean into the wisdom of those kinds of people to guide you through the specificity of your process. I had also mentioned that we'll talk about what to expect from a child after a disclosure. Remember that disclosures are the beginning of a process. After a child has reported the abuse, there is still a long road ahead. And just like any human being who is hurt, there is no straight line to recovery or healing. For many children, telling someone doesn't even bring any emotional relief, and most children continue to still feel the same way they felt before, or even worse after telling. And it's important to keep this in mind because most times, as receivers of the disclosure, we have this unconscious expectation that children will move on so that we can move on. But that's not how it works. What actually happens as a common pattern is that after disclosure, some children shut down. Just like I talked about being tired in my excerpt, some children are so emotionally exhausted from the telling, from watching you process the impact, and from the years of carrying up around the pain that they shut down. Some just don't want any more conversation around their body, so they just go silent after telling you. Some children also start displaying fluctuating behaviors. One day they can be clingy, another day they are withdrawn, they're angry, or some of them even start acting like nothing happened to try to gain a sense of normalcy again, to try to move everybody's attention from them. And this last point on normalcy can actually trick you into thinking that everything is fine, especially when you've been looking out for them to be fine, when you've been looking out for them to move on, because now they are acting like their former selves. But that is just still part of the process. And if you don't know that, you're going to get your hopes up that everything is done and everybody's back to normal. And then you will have a dash because this is just the beginning of a long road. There are also children who may still be navigating fear, guilt, and shame, no matter how well your response was or how supportive you've been. They could also continue to worry about the consequences and to wonder whether or not they've they've started a trouble or they've done something wrong, or whether people will treat them differently. Remember that there's a whole structure outside of you, there's a whole life outside of you that children are exposed to. And no matter how little children are, they can still sense that it's not only your approval that matters. They know they still carry all of the weight of their friends in school, even though they've not told anybody at school. Just telling one extra person, it feels as though the whole world is now trained on them. The eyes of everyone is trained on them. And they're wondering how would this one disclosure shift everything about their lives. And so children might still be dealing with fear, guilt, and shame right after they've told you their disclosure, or right after they've told you their story. After disclosure, some children also start to test you by revisiting the topic indirectly to see if you still believe them or if your earlier response was true. So for a guardian who may not have had such a good first response, this is an opportunity for you to put in some positive affirmations and to correct your very first response. But for someone who has been supportive from the start, it is enough for you to just remain consistent when you see them start to revisit the topic. Just stay in the place of affirmation, stay in the place of letting them know that you're facilitating help and you're making sure that they are getting all that they need to get back to a point where they feel like themselves again. There are also children who experience regression after disclosure. That is, they start to bed weight or experience changes in eating. They become more irritable or show baby-like behaviors. And there are a couple of explanations for this, or a couple of interconnected reasons why this is happening. One of it is that, just like abuse, disclosure carries a sense of a loss of control. And sometimes regression is a child's way of returning to a simpler stage where they felt safer and more cared for. It's almost like someone saying, I'm going to be little again because I don't feel strong enough right now to face my current stage of life. Another reason for regression in children after a disclosure could also be that subject of exhaustion that we talked about. Carrying this secret of abuse for so many years, for so many days, for so many weeks is emotionally draining. Having to see you, their hearts drops, they feel scared, all of those things emotionally draining. And when they finally speak, exhaustion can kick in. Like I mentioned earlier, their bodies could respond now, in the case of regression, to that exhaustion by slipping into earlier developmental patterns because those ones demanded less emotional energy. Sometimes, too, regression is a signal that a child needs more emotional connection after the disclosure. So, behaviors like clinginess, bedwetting, or wanting to sleep with the lights on are subtle requests for reassurance and connection. They are internal questions, internal desires that seem to be embodied physically. Questions like, am I still safe? Will you still love and care for me even when I'm needy? So it's almost like this child is carrying all of these questions and all of these needs and is not able to say it. And now the body is speaking on behalf of them. And it's important to have all of this context so that you have a bit more patience with these children when these start to show up, because it could be confusing for a child who is 16, who is 17 to suddenly begin to bedwet. But these are some of the things that is going on the inside of them, and what they need is love and care and support. Also, the brain is under stress. So the nervous system of the child is also pulling them back into earlier habits that once felt soothing. So all of that was just to give you an idea of what could possibly lead a child back into regression, what is possibly going on internally when regression happens. Now, given all I have shared about the expected aftermath of a disclosure for a child, what should you do to support your child through the after seasons of their disclosure, given all I've shared? First things first, shield them. Create a physical, emotional, psychological, and mental environment of safety. Make sure that that child has no contact with the abuser anymore. It's a very important point. If the abuse happened at a location that you can move them out of, like a room that they used to share with this abuser or something, change the room. Also understand that children that were violated at home may become extra fearful around your family. They may become extra fearful around people that they used to connect with. So this is the best time to shield them and honor their choices and allow them to have all the space they need. It's also a good time to be intentional about who comes around the child, even if they don't live in the house. Because some people could speak some careless word and that could just take or undo the process that has already begun in that child's healing. So limit their circle to people who are supportive, who are affirming, and who are trustworthy, and who are careful. Also try to give back control or give control in little ways. Allow them choose what clothes they'll wear, what food to eat, whether they want to talk or just sit. Give them opportunities to just make choices. Every small decision they get to make will help to rebuild that sense of agency that was lost when someone took something from them without their consent. Also, only disclose their stories to the people who must absolutely hear it. People like the police, people like medical doctors who may need the information for assessments. But outside of that, be absolutely discreet about their story. Sometimes your religious leader may not even need to know if they're not part of the counseling circle that this child is going to need or this child needs to heal. Your religious leader may not even need to know that your child has been abused. I know that's a bit controversial, but it's important, especially if you have pastors or other religious leaders who are fond of allowing or using confidential information as the basics for their next sermon, where a child comes into church the next Sunday and the pastor is talking about how some children are abused in their homes. All of those things can make children uncomfortable. They can make them feel unsafe. So remember that abuse is a very personal issue and a child deserves to have privacy and autonomy of how that information is shared. Also, some people can be very insensitive, like I spoke about with people who come to your house. And you don't want someone randomly commenting on that to your child at school, or a child of your friend shows up in class and is telling everybody in class because you had told your friend the day before and your friend had told their daughter or their son. So you don't want to have that kind of situation. Also, avoid having secret conversations about them where they are, like when they are within the same space as you are. Because after disclosure, a child is still fishing for confirmation of safety. They're still fishing to know whether they are safe or not, whether you are angry or not. And it could just be that one emotional time where you tell your spouse or you tell a friend that you are hurt, that maybe you just tell a friend that, "Oh, I just feel hurt that she didn't trust me enough with this." And it doesn't mean that you blame the child. It just means that that's how you feel at that moment. But that could be the one time where your child is passing by your room and hears that, and be that could be turned into anything in the child's mind, into blame, into my mommy doesn't love me or my daddy doesn't love me. So you want to be careful. You want to realize that right now your walls have ears, and the ears on your walls are your child's ears. You also want to keep reinforcing to the child too that they are not in trouble. You want to keep saying it over and over. Remind them that you believe them and will do everything to keep them safe. And then repeat that as many times as possible. As many times as possible. Understand too that, and be gentle if they decide to pull out of all familiar spaces and activities. If they say they don't want to go to their former school again, they don't want to attend church again, you want to be gentle to walk with them through their reasons, to understand what they're trying to communicate through that withdrawal and all of that, because sometimes their demand for new spaces or for new roles is their mind's way of trying to swipe their slate clean. They want to start a new life. They want to start a new identity, feel as though they are different, like as though it feels as though everything that is attached to the past is attached to the abuse. So you want to gently walk with them through that process and see where a common ground could be met if there's no possibility of meeting all of those demands. But you want to be careful and you want to be gentle because there are psychological reasons why that demand is being placed. Also, normalize feelings. Help them name what they feel without judgment. Tell them that it's normal to feel scared, to feel sad, or even confused after something like that. Let them find space within your home where they can be undone, where they can be imperfect, where they can be sad, can be angry, and can be all of these different complicated emotions and still be loved and not be treated as though they should have come out of this yesterday. Also, encourage safe coping outlets. Give them opportunities to play, buy a beautiful journal if it is an older child or a child that can journal, and show them how to document their thoughts. Introduce them to a sport if they are okay with that. If they have safe relationships in their lives, like they have somebody that you just know they used to be fond of this person and this friend used to make them happy and they feel safe around this person, create opportunities for them to have access to those kinds of people. All of those things can help to release emotions. Professional help and professional support is so important when it comes to children. If possible, involve a child therapist, someone that is trained in trauma or child sexual abuse, or other people who have positioned themselves to help serve children in this area. Also, let them know that, by them I mean children, let them know that therapy is not for broken people, because for some older children, for example, they have ideas about therapy that is not true. Many of them probably think, oh, therapy is for people that are not okay, and you just waking up and saying, I'd like to take you through a therapist, could feel immediately like something is wrong with me, or this is the final confirmation that everything is worse than I thought it is, or it is as bad as I thought it was. So you want to take time to really let them know what therapy is about and what seeking help is about and why they need to seek help. You want to let them know that this is just a part of the healing process. And also, if at the end of the day that child resists, if at the end of the day that child decides they don't want to go through therapy, they don't want to go through any standard counseling service, don't force them. Healing is a long road and is a long process. sometimes they may eventually come around to wanting to be part of that, and sometimes they may not. What you just want to remember is that healing can happen outside of a therapist's office. I feel like we live in a time where healing has been so pushed or made out to be something that can only happen within therapy, and that is not true. We've lived in times, we've lived in generations where therapy was not at the forefront of things, and we had community experiences, we had friends, we had all these other resources that led to conversations and led to groups and support systems that facilitated healing. So you want to let your child know that if at the end of the day they're not still comfortable with therapy or with any external counseling services, that within this home, as long as they're within this love, the safety and everything, they will be fine. So you as a parent, you could go ahead to do some research, because there are helpful information that you will learn if you were in a therapist's office, or if you had access to a therapist, or if they had allowed therapy to take place. So you could go ahead to get those information through books, through podcasts, through different free resources that have been put up, and paid resources that you have access to, and just arm yourself with information so that when she has questions or he has questions, why am I feeling like this? What is going on here? That work that a therapist would have done, which is to give clarity and to give language and all of those things, are now things that you can offer in some sense. Before I move to the next and last segment of today's conversation, I want to remind you of the cornerstones of effective response. And that is that, number one, you must remember what child sexual abuse is really about. You can't effectively respond to a disclosure if you don't understand what child sexual abuse is, or if you have the wrong ideas on child sexual abuse, or if you don't even believe that children are sexually abused and everything involving sex in your mind is consensual, and everything involving sex in your mind was something that a child wanted to be involved in. So you want to remember that child sexual abuse is a situation where a child 0 to 18 who is vulnerable, who is dependent, who is still growing, is being violated sexually by an adult or an older child. And it is never a child's fault. Always it is the responsibility of the abuser who has misused power, trust, and opportunities. You want to remember this. You also want to remember that unless you see children as people worth protecting, you will be unable, or you will not be able to respond to child sexual abuse effectively. So it must begin with you recognizing childhood as a vulnerable state. It must begin with you recognizing children's vulnerabilities. You must be able to see that children are people worth protecting, because we only protect what we believe needs protection. If we don't think pregnant women need protection, then we're not going to pay extra attention to them as they are crossing the road or as they are walking through the night. We will not pay all of those things extra attention that we pay to them, but we pay those extra attention because we believe they need protection. So wherever we see a pregnant woman, we turn around, we try to keep guard. Nobody is asking us to do that, but we've built a conscious societal awareness that pregnant women need protection, and we immediately step into that role wherever we meet them. So that's what we want to achieve with children. And we've redefined protection, right? We've redefined protection. We've established that protection means more than prevention. Protection is comprehensive, and to be a child's protector is to be positioned to keep harm out. Number one, is to be positioned to respond if harm occurs, and then to do the work to restore and reintegrate children after harm. So protection is a 3-tier or 3-gear system. Every person who is with children or has access to children needs to understand this. Protection is beyond prevention. If as a country all we have is preventive services, then we are not being realistic, we are being idealistic, we're expecting the best of every situation, and that is not life. So you want to make sure that your protection is comprehensive and you are positioned to keep harm out when it comes to your children. You have by position to keep harm out. We've spoken about this in the previous episode, where you have every information that your child needs. You've armed your child with every information that they need. You've taken body safety lessons. You've told them all they need to know about consent, boundaries, and all of these other key things they need to know about child safety. Then you've also created opportunity for them to know they can talk to you if anything ever happens. That's the first step of response. You've left an open door system where at any point a child knows they can walk up to you, they can let you know that something has gone wrong. That's how you create room for the possibility that prevention could fail, which would now lead to intervention. And when you've created that and taken up all the steps that we've shared from when we started this disclosure series, then you now go into healing, which is also necessary, because if you've made room for prevention to be, or for protection to be more than prevention, then you make room for intervention, then you definitely need to advance to healing so that the child is restored back to a stage of wholeness. So we've talked a lot about this in the previous episode and throughout this period of the disclosure series. So please catch up on previous episodes to get the full picture. So protection evolves and adapts. It's very important. Protection evolves and protection adapt. We've also established since episode 1, we're still talking about the cornerstones of effective response, what you need to keep in mind to be able to respond effectively at any point in time. We've also established since episode 1 that every child is vulnerable to abuse, no matter how mature or intelligent they are. And we said that that is because abuse is by nature a manipulative and exploitative situation. People use their access to children by reason of relationships, for example, to harm children. People use their power to threaten and intimidate them. And when it comes to manipulation and power, we know that anyone can become a victim of that. We have adults who are cheated out of top business deals all the time by people who are exploitative. We know that some people have just perfected the art of hurting people. And sadly, sometimes those kinds of people encounter children. And if they can manipulate and exploit adults, how much more children who are innocent, vulnerable, trusting, dependent, and still forming language in a lot of ways. Also, disclosures are a long process, and it's okay to be overwhelmed, especially for non-linear situations like in a blended family, for example, where there is this complication. A child who is the other partner's child is sexually harmed under your watch as a mother, for example. That is quite complicated because different feelings can come out of there, even depending on the timing. If this happens immediately after a marriage or a wedding, it could look as though you are just not as invested in this other partner's child as compared to your children. So there are a lot of complications. Or even where the partner, the abuser, is a partner, or in a single parent situation where the other partner may have created room for abuse to occur, either by not being available or by taking a child to a place that the other person had not agreed about. So there are a lot of non-linear situations. But remember that restoring a child to safety is the focus. And I believe that for the right cause, all pain is worth it, all discomfort is worth it for the right cause. So be of good cheer, be of good courage. Take the moment of disclosure and the process of healing one step at a time. Prioritize the child's safety first, then gradually lean into the practical pieces. Just don't demand of yourself that you have everything figured out in that same moment of disclosure. Remember that you've been hit hard and it's okay to be overwhelmed. To end this episode and this series, I'm reading you a composite story. We know that stories paint pictures and pictures live longer. So we attempted to put together all the themes we've explored in this episode into a story that is made of different real stories, but not traceable to any single person. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of evening when silence falls heavy after dinner. The plates were stacked in the sink, and Ada turned to her husband, Hussein, with a voice that carried both trembling and courage. "Our daughter told me something today," she said. "Something happened to her." When she said what, in that instant, the room shifted. Time bent. Words became too small to hold the weight of what had just been spoken. Hussein felt himself break open inside. Rage, grief, disbelief, all of them came rushing at once. He wanted to accuse her, to demand why Ada had not seen it sooner, why he himself had not known. But then he looked at her, his wife, whose eyes brimmed with fear for herself, her child, and for the unbearable loneliness of carrying this knowledge. And in that fragile moment, he made a choice. He reached across the table, took her hand, and whispered, "We're in this together. We'll figure this out." That night, their daughter, Owam, curled on the sofa, and rather than look relieved to have spoken to someone, she looked smaller, as though disclosure had shrunk her into herself. She clung to Ada one moment and pushed her away the next. Later, she refused to talk, choosing instead to retreat to her room. The following morning, she was almost cheerful. She laughed at breakfast, asked about her favorite show, and Hussein's heart rose with hope. Perhaps this was over, but by night time, Uwam had wet the bed, and Hussein knew there is no straight line out of pain. Ada, meanwhile, was breaking. The guilt had crept in, quietly, stealthily. How had she not seen? Was she not a failure? And then the murmurs from relatives began, that cruel shifting of blame towards the mother. But Hussein would not have it. "This is not her fault," he said, interrupting the whispers of his family. "Our child was harmed, and the blame belongs only to the abuser." His voice became a shield, and in those moments, Ada felt seen, protected, less alone. Together, they began small rituals of restoration. They refused to whisper behind closed doors, knowing that Owam's ears were always listening for signs of safety. They repeated words that became anchors. "We believe you. You're safe. You're not in trouble." They guarded her story, sharing it only with those who needed to know, because this story belonged to her, not the world. They kept her routines alive: bedtime prayers, school drop-offs, Saturday pancakes. Stability became its own balm, reminding Owam that life was still normal. When Ada handed her paper and crayons, Owam drew darkness and shapes that unsettled Ada, but she let her draw, because sometimes pictures carried what words could not. Ada herself learned to grieve without shame. She cried, she wrote in her journal, she allowed Hussein's voice to remind her, "You are a good mother. This was not your fault." And Hussein learned too that silence and patience is a form of love. One night, weeks later, Owam whispered a question that felt like a knife pressed to the heart. "Daddy, do you still believe me?" And Hussein answered without hesitation, "Yes, yes, every word, and I always will." And in that answer, something lifted. Everything was not healed nor resolved, but trust, that fragile, necessary seed, began to grow again. You know what I wish I could do? I wish I could gather every single person with access to children in the world, and I could get them to sit still enough to just listen to this and then carry it with them. That's how much I and every one of the members of my team hopes that we can change children's lives. But while we dream for those days, we celebrate you for listening again and for growing your capacity for children. We hope this series has been beneficial to you. Today's call to action is a challenge. Go back to episode 1 and listen again. That episode is a great companion to this episode because it carries the emotional reason why it is important to respond well. And not only that, it defines and captures the meaning of child sexual abuse in a very unforgettable way. We're still going to be here next week, having conversations and bringing you fresh perspectives to child safety and prevention for child sexual abuse. Please note that our podcast is designed to be a resource. It is designed to be a free, accessible tool that organizations can integrate into staff and volunteer training, parent education, and community sensitization. We bring perspectives that rarely appear in manuals. Each and every episode we have put out has sought ways to fill gaps in existing conversations about the subject. We are still inviting volunteers to join our mission. You'll find the link to join us in the descriptions. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Intercept CSA and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you can get notifications and be one of our first listeners. Remember, together we can intercept abuse and protect the children we all care about. Together we can intercept child sexual abuse for future. Until next week, see you.